If you're watching this video and have any interest what's going on in other parts of the world, you almost certainly know about the trucker convoy currently happening in Canada. And if you're not familiar, basically what happened is a mandate came in for all truckers in Canada where they would either need to show proof of vaccination when crossing the border or face quarantine and possible fines. Now this was the straw that broke the camel's back, and the unvaccinated truckers weren't about to take this lying down. So they banded together, coordinating an effort where they would all drive together in a convoy to the Prime Minister's office on Parliament Hill and protest what they deemed to be unconstitutional. Except on their way there, they received overwhelming support from the public and were shocked to see a crowd 500,000 strong welcoming them at their destination. Combining forces, this demonstration outgrew just being about the truckers, and now they demanded that all mandates and restrictions pertaining to the virus be dropped. These truckers are parked outside Parliament Hill as we speak, and as a Canadian, I can say the whole country is sitting on the edge of their seats wondering how this is going to end. But as we patiently wait, I want to take you back 123 years to the streets of New York City and show you just how powerful standing up for your rights can really be. Back in the 1890s, there were about 10,000 homeless children living on the streets of New York City. And at night they slept in doorways, in alleys, stairways, or basically anywhere else they could find shelter. And in the daytime, they would try to find work. Many of them became newsies, which was basically a slang to describe kids who sold newspapers on the streets. They bought papers from the newspaper companies for one price and then sold them for a little bit more and kept the difference. And obviously, the more they sold, the more they made. So they stood on the street corners and yelled out the headlines urging people to buy their papers. And on a good day, a newsie would make about 30 cents, which was barely enough for food and definitely not enough for clothing or shelter. But here's where the story takes a turn for the worst. William Randolph Hearst and Joseph Pulitzer were two of the richest and most powerful men in America at the time. Each of them owned a giant newspaper in New York City and counted on the newsies to hit the streets and sell their papers. In 1898, the Spanish-American War broke out, and publishers started charging newsies 60 cents instead of 50 cents for a bundle, which is basically a stack of 100 newspapers. And at first the newsies didn't mind. The public had a massive appetite for war stories, and since there was no social media at the time, that was basically the only way to stay informed. When the war ended, every publisher lowered their price per bundle from 60 cents back down to 50 cents, except the previously mentioned Hearst and Pulitzer. They did this because their sales were low and thought that they could make up for it by charging the newsies more money for their papers. They figured the newsies couldn't do anything about it because, after all, they were just kids. But the newsies weren't about to take this lying down. Their frustration came to a head on July 18th when a paper delivery man attempted to sell the newsies bundles that contained less than the promised 100 papers. Angry that the millionaires yet again tried to nickel and dime them to save profits for themselves, the newsies tipped the delivery man's wagon and stole all of his papers. Led by three boys called Kid Blink, Racetrack Higgins, and Boots McAleenan, hundreds of newsies met the next day in City Hall Park and formed a union. Being the oldest at just 18 years old, Kid Blink took charge and spoke to the other kids, urging them to stick together like glue, because the only way that they were going to see change was if they stood together and united as one single group. And so the newsies collectively refused to sell Hearst's New York Journal or Pulitzer's New York World until their buying price went back down. The newsies not only refused to sell the Journal or the World, they were determined to make sure nobody else would either. Sometimes hundreds of kids would surround the paper wagons and threaten to beat up the drivers. Mobs of kids yanked papers out of people's hands and just tore them up. Angry boys hurled rocks at the men that Hearst and Pulitzer hired to replace them. And even though the millionaires demanded protection, the newsies were fast and could usually outrun the police. Other newspapers gleefully made heroes out of the striking kids and gave them front page coverage. And surprisingly, the public rallied to their cause and also refused to buy Hearst's or Pulitzer's papers. The Newsies strike quickly spread to Connecticut, New Jersey, and Massachusetts. The World Journal were starting to lose huge amounts of money. But Hearst and Pulitzer still would not budge. However, on July 24th, the boys would make themselves heard. A rally was organized and 5,000 kids marched across the Brooklyn Bridge, flooding lower Manhattan. Newsies tore up copies of the Journal and World and tossed water onto the newsstands that didn't support them. When Kid Blink leaped on top of the speaker's platform, the cheers were deafening. Kid Blink raises his hands for silence and then scratches his head as if he was puzzled. He was in utter disbelief how 10 cents on 100 papers could mean more to the millionaires than it did to these poor, ragged newsboys. The Newsies vowed to keep striking until Hearst and Pulitzer begged them to stop. When the sales dropped by 2/3, both Hearst and Pulitzer finally gave up. And in early August, they offered the Newsies a deal that not only dropped the prices back down to 50 cents per bundle, but even let the Newsies return any unsold newspapers and get their money back. The Newsies took the deal, and in the end, they made more money than ever before. The story of ragtag newsboys inspired many other protests in the decades to follow, and Disney even decided to make a movie based on the strike in 1992, starring Christian Bale. Now, I know it would be a discredit to the trucker convoy to say that these two situations were exactly alike, for a variety of reasons, but most importantly, because its organizers specified there was to be no violence whatsoever, yet the Newsies used quite a bit of violence to get their point across. But I still think that this story illustrates the point perfectly that if you have a strong group that is loyal to one another and passionate about the cause, you can overcome any obstacle, whether that be two corporate millionaires or the federal government of Canada. That's all for today. If you made it to the end of the video, I appreciate you as always. And if you like this video, be sure to leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel if you want to see more content like this. And with that, I'll see you guys next time.